Welcome to the Paul Adefarasin podcast. We revisit the word, surface the big ideas, and give you space to reflect, pray, and act. If you'd like the full message, though, you can watch it on YouTube or listen on Spotify after this episode.
What if the biggest obstacle in your life right now, like the toxic boss or the mountain of debt or even a devastating medical diagnosis,
Yeah.
what if that wasn't actually designed to stop you?
Which is a heavy thought, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, what if it was a deliberately coded mechanism, like something meant to force you to upgrade your entire internal operating system?
It's a profound shift in perspective. And, it is exactly the kind of disruption we're looking at today. We're exploring a framework that basically flips our standard reaction to adversity completely upside down.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
And wow, we have a genuinely fascinating piece of source material in front of us today.
We really do.
It is a transcript from an Easter Sunday service delivered at House on the Rock in Lagos, Nigeria, dated today, April 5, 2026. The address was given by Pastor Paul Adefarasin.
And I have to say, whether you are a deeply spiritual person or, a fiercely secular pragmatist, you are going to want to hear this.
Oh, absolutely. And just to be clear, our mission today is not to endorse a specific theology or to preach to you.
Right. Instead, we are here to impartially unpack the honestly incredible philosophical architecture the speaker constructs. Because he's attempting to completely reframe human existence.
Moving it totally away from this passive religious exercise, right?
Exactly. He defines it strictly as a system of government and creation.
And to truly grasp a paradigm shift of this magnitude, we have to do exactly what the speaker did. We have to start from the very beginning of the message.
Yeah.
We are going back to the book of Genesis.
But importantly, we aren't looking at it as some mystical creation myth.
No, not at all. We are looking at how the speaker breaks down the universe into three foundational variables: time, space, and matter. Okay, let's unpack this.
So the speaker starts with the very first verse of Genesis to lay down what he calls the absolute foundation of reality. Before any biological life existed, he argues that a platform had to be built.
The platform.
Right, a platform. And he defines this platform through three distinct pillars. First, you have time, which he links to the phrase, the beginning. Then you have space, which is represented by the heavens. And finally, you have matter, which is the earth.
It sounds less like theology and more like, I don't know, a software engineer coding an operating system.
That's a great way to look at it.
Like, you literally cannot boot up the program of human experience without the variables of time, space, and matter already compiled in the background.
Exactly. And once that platform is coded, the speaker makes a really sharp, highly deliberate distinction between two types of biological entities that are placed onto it.
Creatures and creators.
Yes. He argues that animals or creatures are fundamentally victims of circumstance. I mean, they operate purely on instinct.
Right. So if a massive storm rolls in, a creature can only react to its physical environment, just, in an attempt to survive.
They just endure it. They find a cave, they huddle in the dark, and they wait it out. Their environment dictates their reality.
But humans, according to this architecture, are made in the image of a creator.
Which is the key difference. That means we are meant to be responsive, not just reactive.
So we don't just survive the storm.
No, we respond to it by harvesting matter to build a shelter. The speaker points out a really practical example. He says, if you need to get to a city like Ibadan, you don't just endure the long, agonizing walk.
Right.
You respond to the friction of distance by creating bicycles, trains, planes.
We invent. We manipulate the matter around us. And there's a vivid analogy from the text that perfectly illustrates this. I love this part.
Oh, the G-Wagon.
Yes. The speaker talks about being gifted a Mercedes G63, a G-Wagon. And, this is an incredibly expensive high-performance vehicle. It's designed for power.
Utterly engineered for performance.
Right. And he notes that if he decided to fill that G-Wagon with soil and use it as a planter for coconut trees, well, he says it would be the most expensive, stupid potted plant in the entire world.
It's such a funny mental image, but it's true. It would be an absolute abuse of its designed purpose. The underlying logic there is that an object's value is intrinsically tied to its intended function. If your internal coding is designed to be a creator, to maneuver through the variables of life with power and intention, but you relegate yourself to just sitting there, passively absorbing the dirt of your environment like a potted plant, well, you are violating your own potential.
Okay, but wait. If we're all inherently creators and not creatures, doesn't this run the risk of blaming the victim?
What do you mean?
Like if someone gets hit by a literal hurricane or they face a devastating corporate layoff, are we just telling them they failed to tap into their creative identity? Because, I mean, sometimes the storm isn't a lack of creativity, it's just a tragedy.
That is a completely fair point, and it's the exact tension the speaker addresses through his concept of subduing the earth.
Okay, how does he frame that?
He argues that the earth, meaning the physical world and its systems, is actually supposed to be highly disruptive. The text notes that creation was deliberately halted at the raw materials.
Like sand, earth, unrefined elements.
Exactly. It was left unfinished on purpose.
So the friction isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature.
According to this framework, yes. The challenges, the roadblocks, the layoffs, they are not inherently signs that you are failing. They're the exact mechanisms required to place a demand on your creative instinct.
Oh, wow.
You cannot exercise creatorial power in a vacuum where everything is perfectly smooth. You require the friction of raw matter to force you to innovate, to synthesize, and to subdue your environment.
It reminds me of lifting weights, actually. Like if you go to the gym, the heavy iron isn't there to punish you.
Right.
It is providing the precise amount of physical resistance necessary to tear the muscle fibers so they can rebuild stronger. The resistance is the prerequisite for growth.
That is a perfect parallel. But, and this is crucial, recognizing that you are a creator who needs resistance doesn't mean you possess a magic wand.
You can't just snap your fingers and change reality.
Exactly. True creation demands strict adherence to a three-step sequence, a sequence tied directly back to that original platform of time, space, and matter.
Which brings us to the speaker's core framework for human progress: identity, activity, and stewardship. Or, to put it much more simply, be, do, and have.
Be, do, have.
Yeah, you need time to be or develop your identity. You need space to do or perform your activity. And you need matter to have or exercise your stewardship.
Let's focus on that first pillar, time, and the concept of be. The speaker illustrates this beautifully using Prince George of the UK.
Oh, this was such a good example.
Right, he says even if circumstances changed and he was suddenly next in line for the throne tomorrow, he wouldn't truly rule the country.
Because he's a child.
Exactly. The system would appoint regents, tutors, and governors to make decisions for him until he reached maturity.
Because he holds the title, but he lacks the internal capacity. Time is the non-negotiable requirement for developing his identity as a king.
You cannot successfully execute the activity of ruling without first becoming the person capable of doing so.
It's all about capacity.
What's fascinating here is how the speaker connects this back to the natural world with the analogy of an apple seed. A seed holds the genetic promise of an entire orchard.
Sure.
But it absolutely must take time to root in the dark before it becomes a shoot and eventually a fruit-bearing tree.
Right. And if you get impatient and dig that seed up early just to check if it's growing,
you abort the entire process.
which radically changes how you view the dark waiting periods of your life. Like what feels like being buried by your circumstances is actually the critical process of being planted. So what does this all mean?
It means we have to respect the sequence. If we bypass the be and jump straight to the have, the system collapses.
It honestly reminds me of those studies on lottery winners. You know the ones.
Oh, definitely.
They instantly acquire the ultimate have millions of dollars of matter. But because they haven't spent the time to be wealth managers, they haven't built the internal identity required for that ecosystem.
And we all know what happens next.
Exactly. They often go completely bankrupt within 3 or 4 years. The matter destroys them because the identity wasn't there to support it. But wait, doesn't our society completely invert this?
Oh, 100%.
Like, we are obsessed with the have, the title, the car, the bank account, and we try to reverse engineer our identity from our possessions.
And the speaker explicitly warns against this modern inversion. There is a direct, vital quote from the transcript where he says, "Don't ask God for more stewardship until you have the capacity to handle the more."
Wow.
The psychological weight of matter is heavy. If you get the massive promotion before you have the emotional maturity and the identity to handle the stress, the very thing you prayed for will crush you.
Because the have is merely matter meant to be stewarded. It's a responsibility.
Yeah.
It is absolutely not an identity to be worshipped.
Exactly. If your identity is tied entirely to the things you possess, you are functioning as a slave to matter rather than a master of it.
So if building this internal be, do, have identity is the prerequisite, what is the actual goals? Like, what are we building all this capacity for? The speaker makes a wild pivot here.
He really does.
He says the ultimate goal isn't spiritual enlightenment or religious piety, it is government.
This is perhaps the most absolute paradigm shift in the entire text. The speaker asserts that Jesus is not a religious icon, and Christianity is not intended to be a religion.
A concept he somewhat dismissively labels churchianity.
Yes, churchianity. Instead, he defines it strictly as a governmental system.
Hearing deeply spiritual concepts framed in civic administrative terms is jarring at first.
It is, yeah.
But it aligns perfectly with the architecture he's built. He points to the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 6, which states, "The government shall be upon his shoulder."
And he redefines the famous titles listed in that verse, like Wonderful Counselor or Prince of Peace.
Right, usually we think of those as ethereal religious honors.
But he frames them as literal, functional governmental cabinet positions. The ultimate objective for an individual operating within this system is dominion.
But dominion here isn't about conquering your neighbor or building an empire, is it?
Not at all. It is about being dominant in your specific assignment of creativity. It's about establishing jurisdiction and competence over your unique area of purpose.
Whether that's engineering, teaching, raising a family, whatever.
Exactly. And he traces this governmental logic all the way through to the Easter story itself.
Oh, right. Framing the crucifixion not as a bloody religious ritual, but as a highly formal legal exchange.
Yes. He highlights the historical details surrounding
A
Barabbas.
prisoner who was released instead of Jesus.
Exactly. Now, the name Barabbas translates literally to son of the father.
Okay, that is an incredible linguistic detail.
Yeah.
It changes the entire texture of the narrative.
It really does. You have Jesus, Yeshua, the actual son of the father, standing side by side with a convicted criminal whose very name means son of the father.
The text argues this wasn't just a spiritual metaphor. It was a legally binding substitution, like an acquittal of mankind's rap sheet.
The price was paid to extract humanity from the charges against it, completely clearing the record.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Because the implications of a cleared record go far beyond just avoiding punishment.
Exactly. For you listening, think about this not as theology, but as psychology. How often do we let our past mistakes, our personal rap sheet, prevent us from stepping up?
All the time.
Right, like leading a project, starting a business, repairing a relationship. We disqualify ourselves.
You do.
This framework argues your record is expunged precisely so you can get out of your own head, drop the guilt, and get back to the business of governing the earth.
But, we have to be careful with the word governing. If we view this entirely through a secular organizational lens, it's easy to assume this is just a manifesto for corporate ambition.
Like maximizing human resources to build little empires.
Yeah.
Isn't there a danger of this just turning into a justification for becoming a ruthless CEO?
There is, but the speaker safeguards against this by clarifying the order of operations. Dominion is entirely about internal alignment first.
Internal alignment.
Right. He argues that you must willingly yield to an ultimate higher authority to gain authority over your own assignment.
So the government has to be established internally before it can ever manifest externally.
Exactly. You must master your own mind, your impulses, and your identity. You have to effectively govern your internal ecosystem before you have any right or any real capacity to govern physical matter, manage resources, or lead other people.
But let's take this out of the theoretical. It's one thing to govern your mind when you're sitting quietly in a room meditating.
Sure.
It's an entirely different challenge when you step outside and face a massive, tangible, terrifying problem. To illustrate how this internal government functions against a physical threat, the speaker turns to the story of David and Goliath.
And true to form, he views this famous underdog story through a highly analytical lens. Goliath was not just a physical threat.
I mean, a seasoned killer standing 9 feet tall with a 16-pound spearhead is pretty threatening.
Oh, absolutely. But functionally, Goliath was fundamentally a stress test of David's internal identity.
The speaker draws a fascinating dividing line here between our physical senses. He argues that doubt is created in the eyes, but faith is created in the ears.
It's a crucial distinction regarding how we process data. Think about the highly trained veteran warriors of the Israelite army.
Right, they looked at Goliath using their eyes.
Yes. They calculated the physical matter, his height, his armor, the statistical improbability of victory, and their eyes generated doubt, which caused them to hide. They allowed the external physical world to dictate their internal reality.
But David, a teenage shepherd, didn't rely on his visual input.
No, he didn't.
He listened to what Goliath was saying. He heard Goliath's threats, and because David was operating from his ears, he cross-referenced that audio input against his internal database.
And he had spent years in isolation building what the speaker calls a word base.
A word base, right. Specifically rooting himself in the ancient covenant promises made in Genesis chapter 12.
Exactly. David knew his internal invisible framework was statistically stronger than the giant's external physical reality.
Which leaves the speaker to completely dismantle the old adage, seeing is believing.
He hates that phrase.
Yeah, he says if you only believe what your eyes can physically confirm, you are trapped in what he calls failure momentum.
Because you will only ever reproduce what already exists. True faith, which he labels now faith, is the substance of things expected, operating entirely in the invisible realm before it ever touches matter.
To bridge this to the secular world, he uses Elon Musk as a modern analogy.
Which is such a great fit for this.
Yeah, when Musk was first conceptualizing Tesla or Starlink, industry experts literally laughed at him. The infrastructure didn't exist, it was entirely invisible.
But Musk believed in the invisible architecture he had constructed in his mind. He took that invisible blueprint and, through sheer conviction and the strategic aggregation of assets, he forced it to become physical.
He governed the matter to match his internal vision.
Exactly.
I love that analogy, but let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's ground this for the listener.
Sure.
It is very easy to say the physical world is less real than the invisible world when you are building spaceships with billions of dollars in funding.
Right.
But when a listener is sitting at their kitchen table, staring at a literal stack of past due bills, or holding a very real medical diagnosis, how do they practically rely on the invisible? Ignoring the bills won't make them disappear.
No, and ignoring the bills would be functioning in delusion, not faith. This is where the mechanics of building a word base become incredibly practical.
Okay, unpack that.
David didn't blindly sprint at a giant with his eyes closed, pretending the danger wasn't real. He had a deep, empirically tested database of past victories.
Right, he had already fought and defeated a lion and a bear while protecting his sheep.
Exactly. He had established a proof of concept. Building a word base today means ruthlessly auditing your input.
What does that look like day to day?
Well, if you spend 3 hours a day doom-scrolling social media or absorbing catastrophic news, your internal database is programmed for anxiety. When a crisis hits, your brain queries its database, and the only result it returns is panic.
Ah, that makes so much sense. But if you deliberately read case studies of human resilience, or if you historically anchor yourself in your own past personal victories, the times you thought you wouldn't survive but did,
your brain queries that data instead, and that data produces a strategic response. Relying on the invisible world isn't about ignoring reality.
Right.
It is about applying a higher, pre-established framework to your current physical crisis. You draw upon your core values, your past resilience, and your developed identity, and you use that invisible architecture to synthesize a very real physical solution.
You don't ignore the bills. You apply your internal capacity to generate the matter required to subdue them.
Exactly.
Which brings this entire architecture right to your doorstep. For you listening, think about the giant standing in your way right now.
Yeah, what is it?
Maybe it's a massive failing project at work, a toxic relationship, or a deeply personal internal struggle. Ask yourself, how much of your reaction right now is based purely on what your eyes are seeing?
Are you letting the sheer physical size of the problem create doubt?
Right, rather than querying your internal database to remind yourself of your capabilities.
It forces a constant internal audit. Am I reacting to this environment like a creature, seeking only to survive the storm? Or am I responding to it like a creator, seeking to harvest the friction to build something new?
When we look at the complete causal journey of this deep dive, I mean, the pieces interlock perfectly. We didn't just walk through a list of topics, we followed a blueprint.
We started with the foundational code of the universe, the platform of time, space, and matter.
We learned that this platform demands a chronological sequence of human development. The be, do, have framework where identity must always precede stewardship.
And that established identity equips us for our true purpose. Not passive religious adherence, but active government over our specific assignments.
Which ultimately allows us to recode our external obstacles through the strength of a carefully curated internal database, conquering the giants that try to trap us in failure momentum.
Exactly. And whether you view the original Easter transcript as absolute divine truth, or simply as a highly intriguing philosophical framework, the psychological insights into human identity, patience, and resilience are undeniable.
It challenges you to stop viewing yourself as a victim of circumstance and to start taking profound responsibility for your own creatorial power.
It really does.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. Toward the very end of his message, the speaker mentions, almost as an aside, that God hides some of the best treasure in the most unusual, unlikely places.
I love that part.
Yeah, he reiterates the core theme. Things which are physical were not made by things which are physical. So take a good, hard look at the biggest physical roadblock in your life right now. The giant, the storm, the thing causing you the most pain and friction.
The thing you wish wasn't there?
Exactly. What if that obstacle isn't actually there to stop you, but is the exact mechanism required to force your invisible potential into the physical world?
A mechanism deliberately placed in your path to make you finally use the code you were built with.
It's time to stop letting your eyes dictate your reality and start listening to the capacity of the mind behind them. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things you see, keep auditing the things you hear, and keep building your own internal database.
Thank you for listening. To go deeper, watch the full message on YouTube or listen to the full-length sermon on Spotify. Follow the podcast, and please share it with someone who needs it and leave your response in the Q&A. Kindly keep your heart on fire, your eyes on Jesus, knowing you are the exception. Grace and peace. We love you deeply.